Welcome everyone to the first of the Diversity Caucus interview series. And today we are really excited to welcome LaRon Scott, who is an associate professor of special education, as well as the founder and executive director of the Minority Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Equity Center, MERIC, at Virginia Commonwealth University. And this evening, Dr. Scott is also launching the Distinguished Fellows Program, which is a new program there at VCU aimed at recruiting and supporting male teachers of color. LaRon's work is extensive. He focuses on the intersections of race and gender in attracting, preparing, and retaining special education teachers. His research also focuses on post-secondary transition experiences for youth of color with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And his work has been funded by $6 million in grants. He's published in multiple peer-reviewed journals, written multiple books and multiple chapters. He is also the co-editor of Inclusion, a peer-reviewed journal that focuses on evidence-based interventions and strategies that promote the full inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities. Somehow he still manages to have some form of a life and do more things and really engage in scholarship and supporting the Diversity Caucus and TED in general and thinking about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. LaRon, we are very excited to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. And again, I'm not sure how I get all of what you just said done as well, but you know, we manage.
We manage. It's good work to be doing, so we can pretend that we are rested in doing that work, right? So, LaRon, I was wondering if you could start by telling us about your role at VCU and also your role in the Diversity Caucus and the focus of your research and your work.
Sure. Just as you noted in the introduction, I'm an associate professor here at Virginia Commonwealth University in the School of Ed, Go Rams Go. And a lot of work that I do here at VCU centers around supporting students of color in their journey, in their sense of belonging, in their activities that they do here at the university, but particularly within the School of Education. So I get a lot of joy with advising students, with conducting research alongside my students, creating research team and supports for our students. And we do a lot of that now through the Minority Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Equity Center, better known as MERIC. So the great thing about that is all the activities that I just listed, we're able to house under that center and provide supports to all students, but particularly to our students of color, or teacher candidates of color, I should say, that flow through our programs here at VCU. So a lot of the work centers around that. We do a lot of community engagement work as well. So I'm not always sitting here in the office. I do go out in the community, in our local schools, networking and coordinating with different organizations to ensure that the work that we are doing is comprehensive. So we're not just passing teacher candidates through our programs here, but we're also ensuring that they have the infrastructure, the induction support, the necessary supports to ensure that they're going to stay as teachers for as long as we can have them.
So I love that you really just kind of focused. You said, you know, we have all these things we're kind of doing in-house under the umbrella of MERIC, but that includes being involved and engaged with our communities, right? The communities around our universities. VCU, and correct me if I'm wrong, students tend to stay in Virginia, Northern Virginia, a lot of students from the College of Ed, is that correct?
We do. So we are a urban focused university, and we are blessed to have a urban focus area. So a lot of our school divisions are great partners with ensuring that our candidates have that smooth transition into their schools. But Hannah, you mentioned it, but we also have good connections in Florida and North Carolina and New York. So many of our candidates, they tend to stick around the area, but we do see that they go to those states a lot as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, so then it's your immediate community understanding that, but then also sending candidates out prepared to do good work in many schools nationally. So that's good to know. Can you tell us a little bit, LaRon, about your work in TED, because you are taking on a new role and really, as I understand it, really working to kind of push diversity, equity, inclusion issues within our organization.
Sure. So as you noted, this is a new role for TED. It's also a new role for me, of course, but I am the member at large with regards to diversity and membership.
Okay.
And the goal for TED, as well as the goal for me, and I'm sure others who are on the board, others who are members of the organization, is to ensure that we have a diverse membership, but not only a diverse membership, but a membership that feels that their identity, the work that they do, can be affirmed within the organization. So we are building a path to ensure that that TED is a space where diversity matters, diversity is appreciated, and like many organizations now, we want to be a leader in that conversation. We want to be a leader in developing policies and practices that underpin issues of diversity. So especially when we think about teacher education preparation, we want folks to know that TED is the place to come to get your answers, to do your work, to feel supported, and especially for folks who have diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, I think that's so exciting, honestly, within our organization, given the member call, like the call amongst members to say we need to not just diversify our field, but diversify our organization and the work that we're doing so that we can really address the needs of families and teachers and students in our schools, which are increasingly and have been for a long time very diverse spaces. So I'm really excited about your work, and the Diversity Caucus is really excited to have you and your wonderful brain on board. So can you tell me, speaking of your brain, can you talk a little bit about how you see your research integrating? I mean, you've talked about it already, but some of these issues, the integration of DEI, because I think sometimes people just think, oh, it's all kind of the same thing, and whether there are particular frameworks or methods that you think are really key in addressing diversity, equity, and or inclusion, or all of those in some sort of configuration.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And, you know, I'll sort of just speak for myself here with saying that, you know, it comes easy for me to ensure that issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the forefront of the work that I do because of my lived experience in those different buckets, if you would have it. And so as a Black man in education, in special education, to be more specific, there's just not a lot of me. And I had to experience that in my teacher preparation program. I had to experience that once I exited the field and got my first teaching job. I had to experience that once I continued to move through the pipeline of the teacher ed system. And those experiences allow me to draw on what's necessary, what's important to do with regards to the research, at least that I focus on. So my research is two-pronged. The first, again, as you noted or alluded to, is diversifying the special education teacher workforce. I really focus on race and gender and how we can develop strategies, interventions, supports to ensure that folks who look like me are able to have the types of supports necessary to move through the pipeline. And the second sort of arm of my work focuses on the transition experiences and outcomes of youth of color with IDD. a important arm of what I do. My sister has a disability, and that line of work is really near and dear to my heart as well. With regards to the types of research methods and frameworks that I tend to draw on, certainly critical race theory is one of them. I think that is an important part of what we do as scholars is opening ourselves up to listen to the voices of people of color and disrupt the ideas, the perceptions, the frameworks that are out there that tells our stories, but not so much do it in the correct way. So disability critical race studies, or discrit, also sense of belonging, I think is a powerful theory that I have incorporated or draw upon in my work that I do, especially when we're talking about attracting, supporting, and retaining teachers of color on predominantly white institutes and campuses. That sense of belonging, I think, is one nugget in ensuring that they're going to be successful once they get into that teacher pipeline and once they go into colleges and universities or educator preparation programs.
LaRon, in looking across your discussion so far, it really feels like, you draw on your own lived experience, which all researchers do, whether you come from a more positivist or a more critical perspective or a more social constructivist perspective. Your lived experience matters in that it highlights, it illuminates and obscures certain things for you, and it sounds like really spotlighted these issues around recruitment and retention and the ways that those I read about sense of belonging, but I've never thought about it because of my lived experience, right? I've never thought about it in how we support teachers in preparation, because campuses were designed for exactly me. And so I think that's a really key thing that hopefully we can all learn and start to think about some of those. I would think it sounds like discrit is one camp, but potentially like those research frameworks and theories that help us to think about how we build community in our own programs, right?
Absolutely. And again, that is where Merrick was born.
Yeah.
It was born out of that idea of creating a sense of belonging for people who did not necessarily feel that they belonged when they came on these type of spaces, right?
Yeah.
So the work that we do is squarely rooted in ensuring that we can disrupt and eradicate that unsafe feeling that that people of color particularly have in spaces where they are not have not traditionally been welcomed.
Yeah, and where their work is very much needed, right? Absolutely. Okay. I would talk to you about that forever, but hopefully we'll talk at TED. So we'll kind of move on to next question. We know as a field that studying diversity and equity and inclusion issues can be challenging. They're pretty thorny issues. People have lots of different ideas about them. We are in a political and cultural landscape that right now it is a challenging issue to discuss. I'd like to hear about some of the challenges you faced and maybe how you overcome them, or if you think there's anything that you've seen as a key to success that you think junior scholars might be interested in if they were trying to conduct similar research or research that addresses some of those same complexities.
So it's a really good question. And again, to your point, there are some challenges that happens when you're in a space where you're trying to confront what ultimately is structural racism in research. And so, I certainly have had my fair share of experiences, but I think it's important that we ensure that we're creating climates where researchers of color do feel included on research teams, right? Where researchers of color are leading these teams. So they're not just invited in these spaces, but they have a voice. They have an opportunity to address concerns and issues within the bounds of research that builds upon the lens that they have. So I think that's actually one of the barriers that many junior scholars, and I certainly experienced myself, is just getting through the door. So when we think about the idea of having, and having may be the wrong word, but including researchers of colors on these teams, there were years where I did not have those same opportunities and experiences and invitations to join teams that were writing about the same thing that I was writing about. But my point of view, I think, could have certainly helped to enhance those spaces. And I certainly still think those types of systems exist. So I'd say to junior scholars and others who are trying to break in this space, find people who not necessarily don't wait on people to invite you. I think it's best at this point to ensure that you are creating a network of people who are able to understand your benefits,
right?
And you can understand theirs, and you put yourself in a position to work with those type of scholars and people who will support you and in that type of work. That was a lot of mumbo jumbo, but I think we got the point.
I don't think that was a lot of mumbo jumbo. I think it's some really important information. I think sometimes, especially when people are new in the field, like myself, or are, at the doctoral student level, you don't think that you necessarily have the right or the skills or whatever to approach someone and say, I want to be a part of this team. And I think to start early and start often is really good advice. And I think you are situating this in a problem that many people, I think, see in our field, is that we don't create inclusive spaces within our research teams. And so that's the advice I'm hearing. Is that a correct assessment there?
You nailed it.
All right, cool, good. A gold star for me, gold star for you.
We got there.
We got it. So 2 more questions. This one, just how do you think that your work with TED has benefited your research, your networking that you just talked about, your practice? And what do you see as the role of organizations like the Diversity Caucus within TED in navigating the challenges of research and connection and professional networking?
Sure, yeah. So TED has just been great for me. You mentioned networking. Certainly that has, I've been a beneficiary of of attending the conferences and meeting people who I don't think I would have necessarily been able to have the same connections with if it was done via email or some other form. And I really also think from a leadership perspective, TED has been able to offer me opportunities to stretch what I would not have ordinarily done on my own with regards to being a leader in this conversation and space around teacher education and special education. The platform, the types of policies, which I think are really important if we actually want to do a lot of the changes that we put forward, is translating that research to practice and to policy. TED has been an organization that I think is doing tremendous work in that area and has allowed me to think critically of how I can translate that into the work that I do. Similarly with the Diversity Caucus, I think that team has allowed a space for sharing ideas, affirming beliefs, affirming conversations. And that's the type of circle, when I mentioned before junior scholars feeling safe, that's the type of circle where I felt safe, and I think others could as well.
I think that's key, and that's important for leadership in TED and other organizations to hear. My hope is that we'll be able to share this interview with many people. And that's an important part of our last question. Something people often ask me is, who should I be reading? I want to diversify who I am reading. And when I say diversify, people are talking really explicitly about saying they want to be reading scholars of color, recognizing that in many ways, people tend to the same old sites and the same old ideas, and we want to kind of push back on that. Scholars of color, scholars with disabilities. Who are the up and coming scholars that you are reading, and what do you find most compelling in their scholarship?
Oh, that's a good question.
A hard one.
So there are two people, maybe three, but two that comes to mind immediately. One is William Proffitt.
Okay.
William Proffitt currently is a doctoral candidate at the University of Kansas. But William has put out some amazing work. He's already worked with some great scholars. He and I have also done some work together. His work with Black boys in special education and overcoming oppression, I think, is a niche area in our field that doesn't get a lot of attention. And so I really say pay attention to the work that he's doing, and I think he could be a great person who serves as a leader in this space and conversations that we still need to have.
All right.
The second is Adai Tefera.
All right. Yeah, I'm excited about her work too.
I love her. So I'm working on a project with her right now, which I'm so excited about.
Awesome.
But she's out of the University of Arizona, and her work focuses on improving equity, but she really has a strong lens on policy. And that, I think, is, when I mentioned earlier, translating research to policy and practice. I think her work really underpins what are the necessary changes in policy that needs to be addressed as we conduct research and we have translational conversations or transformative conversations about what's next and how do we approach policymakers and others with recommendations on what has to be done in these spaces.
That's awesome. Well, so we have two new people that we can reach out to for interviews. So that was really helpful, LaRon. I'm so excited always to talk with you, not to you, not at you, but with you. And just so you all know, LaRon is like one of my favorite collaborators, and I'm excited to collaborate in TED spaces and in scholarship spaces. And I just love hearing about your work, LaRon. It's really been a gift. And so thanks for sharing some afternoon time with us, and good luck this evening at the Distinguished Fellows. So that's going to be an awesome event.
Thank you, Hannah. And again, it's been a joy working with you as well.
Okay, thanks so much, LaRon.